So, I'm pretty sure my dogs are breedist. Our one dog now, but she definitely shows breedist tendencies. I don't think she did it as a puppy. I think it's developed with age. And what I mean is when I take her for a walk or to the park and she sees a dog that's another breed, she straight up ignores it usually. It's like it's beneath her. She kind of just glares at them if they want to come near her. If a small yippy dog starts trying to overcompensate by its size by growling at her, she may start to lose her patience, but for the most part, it's just not worth her time. But should she happen to see another boxer, well, then the tail starts wagging, there's an excited little whine, she just almost jumps up and down to go, and they want to sniff and play and sometimes even kiss each other, and they just met. It's as if they say, hey, you're my kind. You're just like me. We need to stick together.
Right.
Well, I think humans, sometimes we have similar tendencies. Anthropologists tell us that this isn't something we're born with. It's something that we learn to distrust or fear or dislike those who are different than us. It was passed to us, and then we pass it to future generations, whether we like it or not. Thousands of years ago, it made sense. If newcomers come to your town, you want to make sure they're not there to raid and plunder. I mean, there is something healthy about being skeptical, kind of a survival instinct. But too often, fear and anger and distrust and disdain and hate all become intertangled, and you don't know which one started the next one, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we need to be really careful that we don't fall into that trap, because we can miss out on so much. I mean, when I look at the dogs at the dog park, when I walk past, we don't usually get to go in. I have to admit, it's the mutts that look like they're having the most fun. I think it's maybe because they have this gifted ability to be able to see themselves in each other dog. And they'll just play with whoever comes along. Well, speaking of mutts, a couple weeks ago in our gospel, we heard how Jesus sent a couple of his disciples on ahead as he was traveling from one place to another. He sent them to a Samaritan village of all places to set up a place for them all to stay. And when the Samaritans weren't willing to host a Jewish rabbi or his followers, James and John responded like jilted lovers who had been rejected and were angry. And Jesus ended up having to rebuke them because they offered to call upon heaven to rain down fire and destroy the whole place. But the contentious relationship between Samaritans and the Jewish people had gone far before that. Centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries it had been going on. It began pretty much when the northern Israelites and the southern Judeans let's just say, had a difference of opinion about who the next king should be. The Jewish people ended up getting the temple in the breakup, and the northern Israelites were perfectly happy to worship at Mount Gerizim, which is where they believed the right and holy place to worship was, assigned by Moses. Now, with this union dissolved, both territories became weaker and more vulnerable. And so both became victims to the Assyrian captivity and the Babylonian captivity. A few generations later, when they returned, those in the north considered their worship to be the true religion. The word Samaritans that they gave for themselves means keeper of the Torah, where they believed that those in the south had kind of changed up some things while they were away, that they were not holding true. Meanwhile, the Jewish people in the south supposed themselves to be far superior to the Samaritans, who had been forced to intermarry and assimilate with other groups of people in their area. And along with intermarrying and assimilate meant that some other gods came along. So the Jewish people had a derogatory term for the Samaritans, where they called them the people of five fathers, which is sort of like calling them a mutt, or also might be a not so subtle reference to their mother's supposed lack of chastity. They weren't nice about it. You would think that after these exiles, that these people would come together to heal. But instead there was more finger pointing and more blame. And the Jewish people particularly seemed to enjoy disdaining the Samaritans for the choices that they made, that they, of course, would have never made had they been in the same circumstances. And so we come to our gospel in Luke today, where a lawyer who is trying to get all his ducks in a row, or maybe he's trying to challenge Jesus, we're not quite sure which, asks Jesus how to live eternally. And Jesus asks the lawyer, well, how do you understand the law? And the lawyer responds by choosing one passage that talks about loving the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then he chooses another passage from Leviticus about loving our neighbor as ourselves. A passage that continues with how when an alien or outsider or immigrant resides in our land, we are to love and welcome and feed them, not oppress them, to care for the stranger until they're not a stranger anymore. That passage. And so Jesus responds to the lawyer, okay, you're catching on. It's about love, love, love. That's what it's all about. But then the lawyer, wanting to be a good lawyer and cross all his T's and dot all his I's, wants to clarify just who his neighbor is. Even though the passage he just quoted from kind of helped describe that already. Let's just be really sure about who this neighbor is, who I have to love like myself. And so Jesus responds by telling him a story about a man. We're not sure what breed this man is, but we all probably assume he's our own breed. And he's walking along a very dangerous road. And he's attacked and left for dead on the side of the road. And as he's laying there, a priest walks by, and then a church leader walks by. And not wanting to get their hands dirty, not wanting to become unclean, they ignore him. They keep going. But then, one of those icky Samaritans walks by. And he looks at the man, and he sees him. And so it's that guy, that man with 5 fathers, that mutt who was just despicable, who stops, who risks looking past all of the mocking that his people have endured for centuries from the Jewish people. He's able to look past all of the verbal harassment and assault that they have received for centuries from the Jewish people. He looks past the systemic and the overt racism they have received. All of the ways that they have been excluded and put down. And he risks his life and sacrifices his time, his money, his energy to have mercy. This man who would not have been welcomed into this very conversation, this man who the lawyer, if you notice, can't even get the words out of his mouth to call him a Samaritan. This man who was disdained simply because of who he was and where he was born, acted as a neighbor when those with power and authority and privilege had kept going. What we hear in Luke's gospel is Jesus calling us to really see each other as humans, as siblings, as fellow children of God. We hear Jesus define the law of love as having compassion on those who aren't like us, on those who don't look like us, who don't worship like us, who don't have the same values as us, who have 5 fathers, those who are not sure belong here, those who we are certain we would not make the same choices if we were in their circumstances. And we are called upon to reach out to the marginalized and the oppressed with mercy, to welcome them into us and to bring them healing. What we hear in Luke's gospel this morning is Jesus promised us that we have a God who uses the most surprising people in the most unexpected places to offer us God's mercy and grace that none of us deserve. And Jesus promises us that when we act as a neighbor, when we can see a version of ourselves in each other, when we can see God in each other, when we care for those in need, we begin to live eternally. And it's almost like a brand new dog park where we're all mutts together, having a foretaste of the kingdom of heaven. Amen.